I'm Melissa Crawford, 42, and 8 months ago my world shattered when James died unexpectedly. Among his possessions, his Rolex meant everything, a treasured gift from his father that never left his wrist. While drowning in grief, I never imagined his own sister would betray us both. The watch disappeared during what I thought was a normal week, until my phone rang with a call from a local pawnshop owner. What he told me about my in-laws left me speechless. Before I share how I discovered their betrayal, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories about finding strength when those closest to you reveal their true colors. James and I built a beautiful life together over our 15 years of marriage. We met at a friend's barbecue when we were both 27, and I still remember how he made me laugh until my sides hurt. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, that genuine quality is what drew me to him immediately. James worked as an architect at a respected firm downtown, while I taught 3rd grade at Westlake Elementary. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we were comfortable in our modest 3-bedroom home in the suburbs. What many people didn't realize when they met James was that he came from considerable family money. His father, Harold Crawford, had built a successful commercial real estate business that provided the family with significant wealth. Unlike his sister Katherine, James never flaunted his family's financial background. He wanted to make his own way in the world, which was why he became an architect rather than joining the family business. Katherine, James's younger sister by 4 years, couldn't have been more different from him. Where James was humble and genuine, Katherine was flashy and status-conscious. She'd married Philip Morgan, a financial advisor with expensive tastes, shortly after graduating college. Their wedding had been an extravagant affair at a vineyard estate, with no expense spared. James had confided in me that his parents had spent over $150,000 on the event. "Katie's always been the princess," he told me once. "Ever since we were kids. She'd throw tantrums until she got exactly what she wanted, and somehow it always worked." This dynamic continued into adulthood. Katherine and Philip lived in a house they clearly couldn't afford based on their incomes alone. They drove luxury cars, took lavish vacations, and Katherine never wore the same outfit to family gatherings twice. It became apparent to me that James's parents were subsidizing their lifestyle substantially. "Mom and Dad just keep giving her money," James said during one of our rare arguments about his family. "They've paid off her credit cards 3 times now. I've tried talking to them about it, but they don't listen. They think I'm being judgmental." James's parents, Harold and Evelyn, were loving people who had unfortunately created a monster in Katherine through years of indulgence. While they clearly loved James deeply, they seemed to have a blind spot when it came to their daughter. Perhaps they felt she needed more support than James, who had always been self-sufficient. The Rolex that would eventually become the center of our family drama had been in the Crawford family for generations. It was a vintage Submariner that Harold's father had purchased in the 1960s. Harold had received it when he turned 30, and he passed it down to James on his 30th birthday as well. The watch wasn't just valuable monetarily, though it certainly was, especially with its custom engraving and family provenance. Its true value was sentimental. James cherished that watch. He wore it every day, only taking it off before bed. "Someday I'll pass this down too," he'd say sometimes, rubbing his thumb over the watch face thoughtfully. We hadn't been blessed with children, but James had a close relationship with his nephew, Katherine and Philip's son Lucas, and I think he imagined the watch might go to him someday. When James first brought me home to meet his family, I was welcomed warmly. Evelyn had hugged me tightly and Harold had asked thoughtful questions about my teaching career. Katherine had been polite but reserved, assessing me with sharp eyes that took in my simple outfit and unmanicured nails. As the years went on, I noticed Katherine's barely concealed disdain whenever family gatherings turned to discussions of our modest vacation plans or my school district's budget cuts. "You two could afford so much more," she'd say, swirling expensive wine in her glass. "James, Daddy would hire you in a heartbeat, you know. The starting salary would be double what you make now." James would just smile and change the subject. He never took the bait, never let her provoke him into justifying our choices. He was secure in who he was and the life we'd built together. Money has made Katie miserable, he told me once as we drove home from a particularly tense Thanksgiving dinner. She's always chasing the next thing, the next purchase that will finally make her happy. But it never does. I didn't realize then how prophetic those words would become, or how Catherine's materialism would eventually lead to the ultimate betrayal of her brother's memory. The last normal Christmas we had as a family, I noticed Katherine eyeing James's Rolex as he carved the turkey. Her gaze lingered on it longer than was natural, and I caught her nudging Philip and nodding toward it when she thought no one was looking. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Katherine had always envied the things James had, not just material possessions but his contentment, his solid marriage, his sense of purpose. That watch must be worth a fortune now, she commented during dessert. Vintage Rolexes are going for crazy prices these days. It's not about the money, Katie, James said quietly. You know that. She'd rolled her eyes slightly, and Philip had jumped in with questions about the watch's specifications, its collector value, and whether James had it appraised recently. Looking back, the conversation makes my blood run cold. Harold and Evelyn had exchanged concerned glances during this discussion. I realize now they recognized their daughter's covetousness for what it was, but they'd spent too many years enabling her behavior to start confronting it then. If only James and I had known that was our last Christmas together. Maybe I would have memorized his laugh more carefully, paid more attention to the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Maybe I would have taken more photos, made more memories. But we always think we have more time, don't we? Little did I know that in less than a year, I would be facing not only the unbearable loss of my husband but also a betrayal by his family that would shake the very foundation of everything I believed about them. It was a Monday like any other. James kissed me goodbye before heading to work, his coffee thermos in hand and his Rolex glinting on his wrist as he waved from the driveway. I had a field trip planned with my third graders that day. We were visiting the Natural History Museum downtown. I remember feeling annoyed about the mountain of permission slips and lunch orders I had to organize. How trivial those concerns would seem just hours later. I was helping a student identify a fossil when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I ignored it initially. I had 23 children under my supervision, after all. But when it immediately rang again, I asked the museum guide to watch my group for a moment and stepped aside to check. 3 missed calls from James's office. A voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. A text from his colleague Brad, "Call me ASAP." My hand shook as I listened to the voicemail. It was from Harbor Medical Center. James had collapsed during a client meeting. The paramedics had been called. I needed to come right away. The next few hours exist in my memory as disconnected flashes. The school principal arriving to take over my class. The hospital parking lot. The sterile smell of the emergency room. A doctor with kind eyes and a grim expression. Words that didn't make sense: massive heart attack, attempted resuscitation, too much damage, so sorry. James was gone. My vibrant, healthy, 45-year-old husband had died suddenly, without warning. No goodbye. No final words. Just gone. I remember sitting alone in a consultation room, staring at James's personal effects in a plastic hospital bag. His phone. His wallet. His keys. And his Rolex, removed from his wrist by the medical team during their desperate attempts to save him. I clutched that watch in my palm, feeling the metal grow warm against my skin, and finally began to sob. I don't know how long I sat there before the door opened and Katherine burst in, her face streaked with mascara. Philip followed close behind, his expression appropriately somber. "Oh my God, Melissa," Katherine wailed, throwing her arms around me. "I can't believe this. I just can't believe it." In those first raw moments of grief, Katherine seemed genuinely devastated. She and Philip took charge of notifying other family members and friends while I sat in numb silence. When Harold and Evelyn arrived, both looking suddenly aged and frail with shock, Katherine supported her mother while Philip helped Harold to a chair. "My boy," Harold kept saying. "Not my boy." The next few days passed in a blur of arrangements and decisions. The funeral home. The cemetery plot. The obituary. I functioned on autopilot, making choices I never thought I'd have to make at 42. Katherine remained constantly at my side, handling calls and coordinating meals from friends and neighbors. Philip dealt with the paperwork, death certificates, insurance notifications, all the bureaucratic aftermath of a life suddenly ended. "We're here for you, Melissa," Katherine assured me, squeezing my hand. "Whatever you need." The funeral service was held at the Presbyterian church where James and I had married. The sanctuary overflowed with people whose lives James had touched: colleagues, clients, friends, former classmates. I sat in the front pew between Harold and Evelyn, staring at the casket adorned with white lilies, still unable to accept that James was inside it. Katherine gave a eulogy that surprised me with its eloquence and seeming sincerity. She spoke about her big brother's integrity, his talent, his kindness. She shared childhood memories that made mourners laugh through their tears. For a moment, I glimpsed the sister James had loved despite their differences. "James was the best of us," she concluded, her voice breaking. "He showed us all how to live with purpose and authenticity. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make him proud." Philip nodded solemnly beside me, passing tissues and accepting condolences. He seemed like the supportive brother-in-law I needed in that moment. After the service, we gathered at James and my home. Friends had arranged a spread of food that no one had much appetite for. I moved through rooms filled with murmured conversations and sympathetic touches, feeling like a ghost in my own house. Eventually, I slipped away to our bedroom, needing a moment alone. I sat on James's side of the bed and opened his nightstand drawer. Inside was the leather watch case where he placed his Rolex each night before sleep. I'd returned it there after bringing home his belongings from the hospital. Holding the watch again, I pressed it against my heart and finally allowed myself to fully break down, away from the pitying eyes of well-meaning mourners. That watch became my connection to him in the days and weeks that followed. Sometimes I'd wear it around the house, though it was comically large on my wrist. Other times I'd just hold it, running my fingers over the engraving on the back: "To James, love Dad." The steady tick-tick-tick reminded me of James's heartbeat, now silenced forever. Harold and Evelyn's grief seemed to physically diminish them. Harold, once robust and commanding, became stooped and uncertain. Evelyn developed health problems that required frequent doctor visits. I tried to support them as best I could, even as I struggled with my own overwhelming loss. "You're still our daughter," Evelyn told me tearfully during one visit. "That will never change." I clung to that assurance, grateful that despite losing James, I hadn't lost his family too. Or so I thought. As those first terrible weeks passed, I began the impossible task of learning to live without James. I returned to teaching, finding solace in my students' uncomplicated concerns and eager minds. I joined a grief support group at the community center. I started sorting through James's belongings, though I kept his watch on his nightstand, unable to put it away permanently. I had no idea that as I worked to rebuild my shattered life, forces were already in motion that would deliver another devastating blow, one that would come from the very people who had promised to support me through my darkest days. 2 months after the funeral, I noticed Katherine and Philip's presence in my life increasing rather than decreasing. At first, I appreciated their attention. Katherine would stop by unannounced with groceries or coffee. Philip offered to help with financial paperwork and insurance claims. They invited me to dinner regularly, insisting I shouldn't be alone too much. "We're family," Katherine would say, squeezing my hand. "James would want us to take care of you." I believed her. I was vulnerable, still waking up each morning with that crushing realization that James was gone. Having his sister close by felt like maintaining a connection to him. About 3 months after James's death, Katherine began making subtle suggestions about his belongings. "Have you thought about what you'll do with James's things?" she asked one evening while helping me fold laundry. "It might be therapeutic to start clearing some space." "I'm not ready," I replied, clutching one of his sweaters. "Maybe in a few more months." She nodded sympathetically. "Of course. There's no rush." Though some things might be nice to keep in the family, you know? Especially family heirlooms. It was the first hint of what was coming, but I missed it entirely. A week later, during a dinner at their house, Philip brought up James's watch while pouring more wine. "That Submariner of James's, that's a real collector's piece now," he said casually. Harold was telling me the story behind it again. "Pretty special that it's been passed down through the generations." "It is special," I agreed. "James treasured it." Katherine set down her fork. "You know, Mom and Dad were asking about it. I think Dad wants to make sure it stays in the Crawford line." I felt a flicker of unease. "It's safe at home. I keep it in James's nightstand." "Well," Katherine continued, exchanging a glance with Philip, "traditionally those kinds of heirlooms pass to the next male in the family. Dad probably intended it to go to Lucas eventually." Lucas was their 12-year-old son, currently away at an expensive boarding school in New Hampshire. He'd barely known his uncle, as Katherine and Philip had sent him away to school since he was 9. "James never mentioned that," I said carefully. "We always talked about it as his watch." "Because he was still wearing it," Philip interjected. "But now that circumstances have changed." I changed the subject, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Looking back, I should have recognized the predatory gleam in their eyes. Wolves circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. Around this time, I noticed James's parents becoming increasingly withdrawn. Harold had developed heart problems requiring medication, and Evelyn was showing early signs of dementia. Their declining health prevented them from being as involved as they might have been under different circumstances. During one of my visits to their home, I mentioned Katherine and Philip's interest in the Rolex. "They seem very concerned about where it will end up," I said to Harold. He frowned, looking troubled. "That watch was a gift to James. I never said anything about it going back to the family if..." He couldn't finish the sentence. "That's what I thought," I replied, relieved to have confirmation. Harold patted my hand. "Katie has always wanted what others have. Even as a child. But the watch was James's, and now it's yours to do with as you see fit." I wish I'd been more alert to the warning signs that followed. Small items began disappearing from my house: a silver frame holding a photo of James and me on our honeymoon, a pair of his cufflinks, a first-edition book he'd collected. When I mentioned these disappearances to Katherine, she suggested I was misplacing things due to stress. "Grief does strange things to the mind," she said soothingly. "I'm sure they'll turn up." Meanwhile, the pressure to move on intensified. Katherine began bringing boxes whenever she visited, offering to help pack up James's clothes for donation. "It's been almost 6 months," she reminded me. "Holding on to his things won't bring him back." I agreed to let her help with his closet, but I was firm about certain items I wasn't ready to part with, including the watch. That seemed to frustrate her, though she hid it behind concerned smiles. Around this time, Philip mentioned casually that he was between clients at his financial advisory practice. Katherine complained about having to cancel their annual summer vacation because of temporary cash flow issues. "We'll bounce back," she assured me over lunch one day. "We always do." I sympathized, distracted by my own financial concerns. James's life insurance had paid out, but I was still adjusting to living on one income and dealing with some medical bills that had arrived after his death. In retrospect, their financial desperation explains what happened next, though it doesn't excuse it. Nothing could excuse such a profound betrayal of trust, especially from family who should have been protecting me instead of exploiting my grief. The weekend everything changed started innocently enough. My sister Dana invited me to spend a few days at her lake house about 3 hours away. I hesitated, not having spent a night away from home since James died. "You need a change of scenery," Dana insisted. "Just for the weekend. The lake is peaceful this time of year." I finally agreed, thinking the break might be good for me. Katherine offered to check on the house while I was gone. "I'll water your plants and bring in the mail," she said. "You go relax with Dana." I thanked her, handed over my spare key, and drove to the lake house Friday afternoon. For a brief time, surrounded by my sister's loving family, I felt the crushing weight of grief lift slightly. We took walks along the shoreline, played board games, and stayed up late talking about happy memories rather than sad ones. I had no idea that back home, the betrayal was already underway. I returned home Sunday evening feeling somewhat refreshed. Dana had convinced me to stay an extra day, arguing that the Memorial Day holiday meant I didn't need to rush back for work. As I unlocked my front door and stepped inside, something felt immediately wrong. The house seemed different somehow, though I couldn't immediately identify why. I set down my overnight bag and walked through the rooms, an uneasy feeling growing in my stomach. In the kitchen, the cookie jar had been moved from its usual spot. The throw pillows on the couch were arranged differently. Small things most people wouldn't notice, but this was my home, and someone had disturbed it. I headed to the bedroom, telling myself I was being paranoid. Katherine had been here to water plants, of course things might be slightly out of place. But when I entered the bedroom, my heart began to race. The drawer of James's nightstand was slightly ajar. I rushed over and pulled it open fully. The leather watch case was there, but something made me flip it open immediately. It was empty. The Rolex was gone. I frantically searched the entire drawer, then the whole nightstand. I looked under the bed, on James's dresser, in the bathroom. My movements became increasingly desperate as the reality sank in. The watch had disappeared. With shaking hands, I called Katherine. "Hey, Melissa. How was the lake?" she answered cheerfully. "Katherine, did you move James's watch while you were at the house?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. A pause. "His watch? No, why would I do that? It's not in its usual place. I can't find it anywhere." Another pause, longer this time. "That's strange. Maybe you moved it before you left and forgot? You've been under so much stress." "I didn't move it," I said firmly. "It was in his nightstand when I left on Friday. Now it's gone." "Well, I only went in to water the plants in the living room and kitchen," she said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "I didn't go into your bedroom at all." The lie was so blatant it took my breath away. The only houseplant in the bedroom was a fern on the windowsill, and it had clearly been watered. "Katherine, I know you were in the bedroom. The plant in there has been watered." "Oh. Right, I forgot about that one," she said quickly. "But I didn't touch anything else, I swear. Listen, Philip's calling me for dinner. Why don't you keep looking? I'm sure it will turn up." She hung up before I could respond. I sat on the edge of the bed, a cold certainty settling over me. Katherine had taken the watch. My mind flashed back to all the comments, all the questions about its value, all the suggestions that it belonged in the family. A horrible thought occurred to me, and I went to check the hiding place where I kept my spare key, a magnetic box under the porch railing. The key was missing. Over the next hour, I made a thorough inventory of the house. In addition to the Rolex, I discovered several other items missing: a pair of diamond cufflinks that had belonged to James's grandfather, a small Tiffany clock from our mantel, and an antique fountain pen James had used to sign special documents. All items that were small, valuable, and easily transported. I called Harold and Evelyn, but their caregiver said they'd already gone to bed. I left a message asking them to call me in the morning, then sat down at my computer. Almost as an afterthought, I opened Facebook. Katherine rarely posted, preferring Instagram for her carefully curated life snapshots. But Philip was an avid Facebook user, constantly checking in at upscale restaurants and events. His most recent post made my blood run cold. "Finally booked. Maldives, here we come. 3 weeks in paradise starting June 15th. Sometimes you just have to treat yourself." The post included a screenshot of a booking confirmation for the Waldorf Astoria Maldives at the Fushi, showing a payment of just over $27,000. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Katherine and Philip had claimed financial difficulties just weeks ago. Now they were suddenly able to afford a luxury vacation that cost more than most people's annual salary? The timing was too coincidental. I checked the post's date, May 23rd, just 2 days after I'd left for my sister's lake house. With a shaking hand, I picked up my phone again and called the local police department. Officer Reynolds arrived within the hour, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She took down all the information, examining the nightstand and the empty watch case. "Do you have any photos of the missing items?" she asked. Fortunately, I had several pictures of James wearing the Rolex, as well as insurance documentation that included descriptions of the other missing items. "And you suspect your sister-in-law and her husband?" Officer Reynolds confirmed. "Yes," I said, showing her Philip's Facebook post. "They claim to be having financial problems, but now they're booking an extremely expensive vacation." "And the timing?" Officer Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "Unfortunately, this happens more often than you'd think. Family members taking advantage during times of grief." She sighed. "The challenge here is proving it. They had permission to be in your home, so there's no breaking and entering. It's your word against theirs about the items. So there's nothing you can do?" I asked, despair washing over me. "I'll file the report, and we'll check local pawn shops. Items like that Rolex are distinctive. If they've tried to sell it locally, we might get lucky." She didn't sound optimistic. "I'd also recommend changing your locks immediately." After Officer Reynolds left, I sat alone in the living room, feeling violated in a way I hadn't expected. James's death had been devastating but natural, a tragic medical event no one could have prevented. This betrayal by his own sister felt deliberately cruel, a second loss that was entirely preventable. I changed my locks first thing the next morning. When I called Harold and Evelyn to tell them what had happened, Evelyn became confused and distressed, unable to follow the conversation. Harold sounded tired and defeated. "I'll talk to Katherine," he promised, though his voice lacked conviction. There must be some misunderstanding. But I knew there was no misunderstanding. Katherine and Phillip had seen an opportunity and taken it, betraying not just me but James's memory and his parents' trust. That night, I cried myself to sleep clutching James's pillow, mourning not just my husband but the family I thought I had. 2 weeks passed with no developments. Officer Reynolds called to say they'd checked local pawn shops with no success. Harold reported that Katherine had vehemently denied taking anything, suggesting I was becoming unhinged with grief and making up stories. I had almost given up hope of ever seeing James's watch again when my phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon as I was grading papers at my classroom desk. The number was unfamiliar, with a local area code. Little did I know that this call would change everything. "Is this Melissa Crawford?" a man's voice asked when I answered. "Yes, it is." "Who's calling?" "My name is Frank Martinez. I own Platinum Pawn on Westheimer Road. I think I might have something that belongs to you." I gripped the phone tighter, my heart suddenly racing. "What is it?" "A Rolex Submariner watch. Vintage model, probably from the 1960s. It has an engraving on the back that says, 'To James, love Dad.'" I gasped, unable to speak for a moment. When I found my voice again, it came out as a whisper. "That's my husband's watch. It was stolen from our home 2 weeks ago." "I thought it might be," Frank said, his voice gentle but businesslike. "A man brought it in about 10 days ago. Said it was a family heirloom he'd inherited from his father. But something didn't sit right with me. The way he kept checking the door, like he was nervous someone would see him. And when I noticed the engraving had a different name than the ID he showed me." "Who was it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "His license said Philip Morgan. I gave him a fair price for it, $15,800. It's worth more, but that's standard for pawn transactions." I closed my eyes, the final confirmation of Katherine and Philip's betrayal washing over me. "Did you already sell it?" "No, ma'am. That's why I'm calling." After he left, I kept thinking about that engraving. The way he avoided eye contact when I asked about James. So I did some research online. Found an obituary for James Crawford from about 8 months ago. The photo showed him wearing what looked like this same watch. That's right, I said, tears welling in my eyes. James died of a heart attack in October. That watch was his most treasured possession. His father gave it to him. Frank's voice softened further. I'm very sorry for your loss, Mrs. Crawford. I lost my wife to cancer 6 years ago. I know how hard it is. Thank you, I whispered. But I don't understand, why are you calling me? Don't pawn shops usually just sell what people bring in? Usually, yes. But I've been in this business 30 years, Mrs. Crawford. I've seen a lot of desperate people, and I've developed a good sense for when something's not right. This watch, it's not just a luxury item. It's a family legacy. When I realized it might have been stolen from a widow. He paused. Let's just say I have principles. My father taught me that a man's good name is worth more than money. I was overwhelmed by the stranger's decency. What happens now? Do I need to buy it back from you? No, ma'am. If it was stolen, it remains your property legally. But we'll need to involve the police to document everything properly. I've already put the watch in my safe. It won't be displayed or sold until this is sorted out. I filed a police report when it disappeared, I told him. Officer Reynolds with the Houston PD. Good. Why don't you contact Officer Reynolds and have her meet us at my shop tomorrow? I have security camera footage of the transaction with Mr. Morgan. That should help your case. I scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon, then sat at my desk in stunned silence after hanging up. After weeks of feeling powerless, justice suddenly seemed possible. I allowed myself to hope that James's precious watch might actually come home. That evening, I called Dana to share the news. This pawn shop owner sounds like a good man, she said. But prepare yourself, Melissa. Katherine and Phillip will probably deny everything, even with evidence. I know, I sighed. But at least I'll get the watch back. That's what matters most. And what about pressing charges? Dana asked carefully. They committed a crime. I hadn't fully considered that aspect yet. Katherine was still James's sister, still Harold and Evelyn's daughter. Could I really be the one to potentially send her to jail? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants them to face consequences. Another part thinks about what James would want. Dana finished for me. Exactly. Well, James would want his watch back where it belongs, Dana said firmly. Start there. The rest can be decided later. The next day, I left school immediately after dismissal and drove to Platinum Pawn. It was a clean, well-organized shop in a decent part of town, with high-end items displayed in locked cases. Nothing like the seedy pawnshop stereotype from movies. Frank Martinez met me at the door, a tall man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and kind brown eyes. He shook my hand warmly. Officer Reynolds called to say she's running about 15 minutes late, he informed me, leading me to a small office in the back. Can I get you some water or coffee while we wait? Water would be nice, thank you. As Frank stepped out, I glanced around his office. Family photos lined the walls and desk. Frank with a smiling woman I assumed was his late wife, children at various ages, recent pictures with grandchildren. This was a family man, someone who understood the value of connections and memories. When he returned with my water, I gestured to the photos. Beautiful family. He smiled proudly. My greatest blessing. That's my Maria. Been gone 6 years now. He touched a frame holding a photo of a vibrant woman with a wide smile. We were married 32 years. I'm so sorry for your loss, I said, the familiar phrase carrying extra weight between two people who understood grief firsthand. Thank you. It gets more manageable with time, but the missing never stops. He sat down behind his desk. That's partly why your situation bothered me so much. Family heirlooms, they're not just things. They're connections to the people we've lost. Officer Reynolds arrived a few minutes later, apologizing for the delay. After brief introductions, Frank opened his safe and removed a familiar leather case. My breath caught as he opened it to reveal James's Rolex, exactly as I remembered it. I reached out with trembling fingers but hesitated before touching it. "Go ahead," Frank encouraged gently. I picked up the watch, running my thumb over the smooth metal and glass just as James had done countless times. I turned it over to see the engraving, and tears spilled down my cheeks. "It's definitely James's," I confirmed, my voice breaking. Officer Reynolds nodded, making notes in her notebook. "Mr. Martinez, you mentioned you have security footage?" "Yes, right here." Frank turned his computer monitor so we could all see it, then pulled up a video file. "Our system keeps footage for 30 days. The timestamp showed May 22nd, the day after I'd left for Dana's lake house. The black and white video clearly showed Philip entering the shop, looking nervously over his shoulder before approaching the counter. The footage had no audio, but we could see him speaking with Frank, then placing the watch on the counter. The camera angle perfectly captured Philip's face and the watch changing hands. "That's definitely Philip Morgan," I confirmed. "My brother-in-law." Officer Reynolds looked satisfied. "This is excellent evidence, Mr. Martinez. Along with Mrs. Crawford's police report and the timing of events, we have a strong case." "What happens next?" I asked. "I'll update the case file with this new information. We'll need to question Mr. Morgan formally. Given the value of the watch, this could be charged as felony theft." She looked at me carefully. "Is that what you want, Mrs. Crawford? I should tell you that family cases like this can get messy." I thought about James, about what he would want. He had valued honesty and integrity above all else. He wouldn't have wanted his sister to steal from his widow, but would he want her to go to jail? "I want the watch back, definitely," I said slowly. "As for pressing charges, I need to think about that." Officer Reynolds nodded understandingly. "The first step is recovery of the property, which we're accomplishing today. Mr. Martinez, the department will reimburse you for the amount you paid, since you purchased the item in good faith." Frank shook his head. "I'd prefer to return Mr. Morgan's payment directly to him when he's brought in for questioning. Let him explain to the officers where he got the money for his vacation." I couldn't help but smile at Frank's sense of justice. After completing the necessary paperwork, I was officially allowed to take the watch home. I slipped it onto my wrist, where it hung loosely but comfortingly. "Thank you," I said to Frank as I prepared to leave. "What you did, most people wouldn't have bothered." He shrugged modestly. "Like I said, principles matter. My father taught me that, and I've taught my sons the same." On impulse, I hugged him. This stranger had restored not just James's watch but a small piece of my faith in humanity. "Your husband would be glad it's back where it belongs," Frank said as he walked me to my car. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. As I drove home with the watch safely on my wrist, I felt James's presence more strongly than I had in months. The watch was coming home and now it was time for Katherine and Phillip to face the consequences of their betrayal. The next morning, I met Detective Sandra Hayes at Platinum Pawn. She had taken over the case from Officer Reynolds, as the value of the stolen items classified it as grand theft. "We've reviewed the security footage Mr. Martinez provided," Detective Hayes explained as we sat in Frank's office. "It clearly shows Philip Morgan pawning the watch that you've identified as belonging to your late husband." Frank nodded. "I've transferred the original footage to the police department, along with all the paperwork from the transaction. Mr. Morgan provided his driver's license and signed our standard form stating he was the legal owner of the item. Which means we have him on multiple counts," Detective Hayes added. "Theft and fraud, at minimum." My stomach tightened. Despite everything, I still found it difficult to reconcile the Katherine and Phillip I thought I knew with people who would steal from a grieving widow. "What happens now?" I asked. "We've contacted Mr. Morgan and requested that he and his wife come to the station this afternoon for questioning." We didn't specify the reason, just that it concerns a reported theft. Based on your statement, we believe Mrs. Morgan was likely involved as well. Will you arrest them? The question felt surreal leaving my lips. Detective Hayes considered her response carefully. That depends partly on how they respond to questioning, and partly on whether you wish to press formal charges. Given the family connection, some victims prefer to handle restitution privately, though the district attorney could still pursue criminal charges regardless. I twisted James's watch on my wrist, thinking about what he would want. I need to see them first, I decided. I need to hear what they have to say for themselves. Detective Hayes nodded. That's reasonable. Would you be willing to come to the station this afternoon? We can arrange for you to observe the questioning. Yes, I said firmly. I want to be there. The police station was busier than I expected for a weekday afternoon. Detective Hayes led me to a small room with a one-way mirror overlooking an interrogation room. You'll be able to see and hear everything, but they won't know you're here unless we decide to bring you in, she explained. I sat alone in the dimly lit observation room, heart pounding as I waited. About 15 minutes later, the door to the interrogation room opened, and Katherine and Phillip walked in, followed by Detective Hayes and a male officer she introduced as Detective Wilson. Katherine looked annoyed, checking her watch repeatedly as they sat down. Phillip appeared nervous, his typical confidence notably absent. Thank you for coming in, Detective Hayes began pleasantly. As I mentioned on the phone, we're investigating a theft report, and we believe you may have information that could help us. I don't see how, Katherine replied curtly. We haven't reported any theft. This concerns items stolen from the home of Melissa Crawford approximately 2 weeks ago, Detective Wilson clarified. Katherine's expression immediately shifted to one of exaggerated concern. From Melissa's house? That's terrible. What was taken? Several valuable items, Detective Hayes said, including a vintage Rolex submariner that belonged to her late husband, James Crawford. I watched through the glass as Philip's face drained of color. Katherine maintained her composure better, but her hand moved to clutch Philip's arm in what appeared to be a warning. That's awful, Katherine said smoothly. James loved that watch. Has Melissa checked everywhere? She's been very emotional since James died. Sometimes she misplaces things. The condescension in her voice made my blood boil. We have reason to believe the watch wasn't misplaced, Detective Hayes continued, her tone still conversational. In fact, we know exactly where it went. She slid a photograph across the table, a still from Frank's security footage showing Philip placing the Rolex on the counter at Platinum Pawn. Mr. Morgan, would you care to explain how you came to be in possession of a watch belonging to your late brother-in-law? Philip stared at the photo, then looked desperately at Katherine. The silence stretched uncomfortably. There must be some mistake, Katherine finally said, but her voice had lost its certainty. No mistake, Mrs. Morgan. We have the full security video, the transaction records, and Mr. Morgan's signature on documents stating he was the legal owner of the watch. He received $15,800 for it, which I understand was used to help fund your upcoming vacation to the Maldives. Katherine's face hardened. We want a lawyer. That's certainly your right, Detective Wilson acknowledged. But before we go down that road, you should know that Mrs. Crawford has identified several other missing items as well. We've already contacted other pawnshops and online marketplaces with descriptions. If those items surface with connections to either of you, the charges will multiply. Philip looked increasingly panicked. He whispered something to Katherine, who shook her head sharply. Actually, Philip said, ignoring Katherine's warning glare, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The watch. I thought it would be better used than sitting in a drawer. James wouldn't have wanted it just gathering dust. Philip, shut up, Katherine hissed. But the dam had broken. Melissa wasn't appreciating its value, he continued desperately. It's a family heirloom. It should stay in the family. And you consider selling it to a pawnshop, staying in the family? Detective Hayes asked mildly. We were going to buy it back, Philip claimed. After our financial situation improved. It was just a temporary solution. Katherine stood abruptly. We're not saying another word without an attorney present. Detective Hayes nodded. That's your right. But before you go, there's someone who would like to speak with you. She came to the observation room door and gestured for me to join them. My legs felt wooden as I walked into the interrogation room, James's watch prominently displayed on my wrist. Katherine's eyes widened when she saw me, then narrowed when she noticed the watch. Melissa. I see you found it after all. The casual dismissal in her tone broke something inside me. No, Katherine. Frank Martinez found it. The pawnshop owner who recognized it as stolen property and contacted me. It wasn't stolen, she insisted. It's a family heirloom. It belongs with the Crawfords. I am a Crawford, I said quietly. James made me a Crawford 15 years ago. And this watch was his, given to him by his father. Not yours. You don't deserve it, Katherine spat, her composed facade crumbling entirely. You got everything: James's love, his attention, his devotion. Do you know what it was like growing up with perfect James as a brother? Nothing I did was ever good enough. And then he married you, and you both judged us for how we lived, looking down on us from your moral high ground. I stared at her in shock. Is that what you really think? James loved you, Katherine. He worried about you, yes, but he never judged you. He left me nothing in his will, she countered bitterly. Just a few personal mementos. After everything, that's all I was worth to him. Because he knew your parents were providing for you, I said, realization dawning. He knew you'd be taken care of. We have debts you don't know about, Philip interjected, earning another furious look from Katherine. Serious debts. The Maldives trip was supposed to be a new start for us. We've been working so hard for so long. So you stole from me? I asked incredulously. From your brother's widow? You took the watch from my bedroom while I was away, using the key I trusted you with. You took other things too: the cufflinks, the clock, the pen. Katherine's defiance wavered, and I glimpsed something almost like shame before her expression hardened again. We deserved something for all we've done. For taking care of you after James died. Taking care of me? I repeated, disbelieving. You were planning to rob me all along. That's why you kept coming over, why you insisted on helping me sort through James's things. You were just waiting for the right opportunity. Philip had the decency to look ashamed, but Katherine remained defiant. Mrs. Crawford, Detective Hayes intervened gently, would you like to press charges? I looked at Katherine, at the sister of the man I had loved with all my heart. The woman who had held me at his funeral and promised to always be there for me. The woman who had betrayed that promise in the most painful way possible. Yes, I said finally. Yes, I want to press charges. The next hours passed in a blur of statements and paperwork. Katherine and Philip were formally arrested for grand theft, fraud, and filing false statements. They were released on bail later that evening, with a court date set for the following month. I called Harold from the police station, dreading the conversation. His health had been precarious since James's death, and I feared this news might be too much for him. I know, he said when I started to explain, his voice tired but clear. Detective Hayes called us before they brought Katherine and Philip in. She wanted to make sure we heard it from the authorities rather than through gossip. I'm so sorry, Harold, I said, tears streaming down my face. I never wanted this. You have nothing to apologize for, Melissa, he replied firmly. Katherine made her choices. Philip too. Evelyn and I, we've enabled her for too long. Perhaps this is the wake-up call she needs. News of the arrests spread quickly through our social circle. Some of Katherine and Philip's friends reached out to me, expressing shock and offering support. Others took their side, suggesting I was being vindictive and that family matters should be handled privately. The most unexpected call came from Lucas, Katherine and Philip's son, from his boarding school in New Hampshire. Aunt Melissa?" His young voice sounded uncertain. "Is it true what they're saying about Mom and Dad?" My heart broke for him. At 12 years old, he was old enough to understand what was happening but too young to process the complexity of it. "They made a mistake, Lucas. A serious one. But they're still your parents, and they still love you." "Did they really steal Uncle James's watch?" I closed my eyes, wishing I could protect him from the truth. "Yes, they did. But the watch has been recovered." "Good," he said simply. "Uncle James loved that watch. He showed it to me once, told me about great-grandpa buying it and how it passed down. I thought it was cool." The guilelessness of his response brought fresh tears to my eyes. "It is cool. And you know what? James would have loved knowing you appreciated its history." As the court date approached, Katherine and Philip's attorney reached out about a potential plea deal. They would return all stolen items, pay restitution for those they'd already sold, and perform community service. In exchange, they would plead guilty to reduced charges that wouldn't include jail time. The district attorney called to get my input. "It's a reasonable offer," she explained. "First-time offenders, family connection, all stolen items recovered or compensated for. But if you feel strongly about pursuing maximum charges, we can take it to trial." I thought about James, about what he valued most. Integrity, yes, but also compassion and family. Would sending Katherine to jail honor his memory, or would it just create more pain? "I'll accept the plea deal," I decided. "On one condition: they both need to get counseling. Katherine especially. This isn't just about the theft. There's something deeper going on with her." The district attorney agreed to add mandatory counseling to the terms of the plea agreement. The day of the court hearing arrived. I sat on one side of the courtroom with Dana beside me for support. Harold and Evelyn sat in the middle, torn between their children even now. Katherine and Philip looked subdued in professional attire that couldn't hide the strain of the past weeks. Judge Wilkins was a stern-looking woman in her 60s who reviewed the case details carefully before addressing the defendants. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, I've been on this bench for 22 years, and family theft cases are among the most troubling that come before me. The breach of trust involved goes beyond the monetary value of the items taken." She fixed them with a penetrating stare. "You stole from a widow, from your own brother's widow, taking advantage of her grief and vulnerability. The fact that you specifically targeted a family heirloom with profound sentimental value makes your actions particularly reprehensible." Katherine stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Philip had the grace to look ashamed. "I'm accepting the plea agreement because Mrs. Crawford has shown remarkable grace in not insisting on maximum charges. But make no mistake, this was felony theft, and you're receiving leniency you may not deserve." The final terms included 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service each, mandatory counseling, full restitution for items sold, and a restraining order preventing them from coming within 100 yards of my home. The Maldives vacation was, of course, cancelled. The social fallout was significant. Philip lost several clients at his financial advisory practice. Katherine's carefully cultivated social status took a devastating hit. Several country club friends quietly distanced themselves. Perhaps the most painful consequence for them was Harold and Evelyn's reaction. After decades of enabling Katherine's behavior, her parents finally recognized the monster they'd helped create. They established a trust for Lucas's education and future needs, but informed Katherine and Philip that there would be no more financial bailouts. The family gathering after court was awkward and strained. Harold had insisted we all come to their home to clear the air. Katherine offered a stilted apology that sounded more rehearsed than sincere. Philip seemed genuinely remorseful, though whether for the theft itself or for being caught remained unclear. "I don't expect forgiveness," Katherine said stiffly. "But I hope someday we can rebuild some kind of relationship." I looked at her, this woman who had once been my sister-in-law, who had held my hand at James's funeral and then betrayed his memory so completely. "I don't know if that's possible, Katherine," I answered honestly. "Trust, once broken, is very hard to repair." But for James's sake, and for your parents, I'm willing to leave the door open a crack. The rest is up to you. It wasn't the happy family reconciliation Harold had hoped for, but it was the most honest response I could give. Some wounds take a very long time to heal, if they ever do. As we were leaving, Harold took my hand and pressed something into it, a small key. James's childhood piggy bank, he explained with a sad smile. He kept his most treasured small items in it. I found it in the attic yesterday. I think he'd want you to have it. The simple gesture of trust meant more than he could know. That night, as I drove home with James's watch securely on my wrist, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief, vindication, lingering anger, but also a strange sense of peace. The betrayal had been painful, but the truth was out now. No more pretending, no more wolves in sheep's clothing circling my life. And in bringing Katherine and Philip's actions to light, I had honored James in the way that mattered most, by standing up for the values he had lived by. 1 year after James's death, I stood in my living room looking at the custom display case I'd had made for his Rolex. The handcrafted wooden box with its glass top allowed me to see the watch while keeping it protected. I'd placed it on the bookshelf where James had kept his favorite architecture books, a fitting tribute to the man who had worn it with such pride. The journey to this moment of relative peace had been anything but straightforward. After the court hearing, I'd cycled through periods of intense anger, profound sadness, and lingering disbelief at Katherine and Philip's betrayal. How could James's own sister have done something so callous? How had I not seen her true nature during all those years? Even with the watch safely returned, something fundamental had shifted in my world. The family I thought would support me through my grief had instead exploited it. The betrayal had added a bitter layer to my mourning for James, forcing me to question relationships I had previously taken for granted. Harold and Evelyn had their own reckoning to face. At 78 and 75 respectively, they found themselves confronting the uncomfortable truth that their parenting had contributed to Katherine's sense of entitlement. Years of indulgence, of solving problems with money rather than consequences, had created a daughter who believed her desires trumped others' rights, even her brother's widows. We failed her, Evelyn confessed during one of my visits, her eyes clear during a rare lucid moment. We thought giving her everything she wanted was love. We were wrong. The strain had accelerated Evelyn's cognitive decline. Harold had hired full-time care for her by this point, and he divided his time between managing her needs and attempting to rebuild some semblance of a relationship with Katherine. She's still my daughter, he told me wearily. Despite everything. I understood, even if I couldn't share his capacity for forgiveness yet. Blood ties run deep, and Harold was from a generation that believed family stayed together no matter what. But even he had finally established boundaries, closing the seemingly bottomless financial well Katherine and Philip had drawn from for years. My own healing journey began in earnest about 3 months after the court hearing, when I finally took my grief counselor's advice and scheduled an appointment with Dr. Anita Richardson, a therapist specializing in complex grief and betrayal trauma. What Katherine and Philip did wasn't just theft, Dr. Richardson explained during our first session. It was a profound violation of trust during your most vulnerable time. It's natural to feel this has complicated your grief for James. Over weekly sessions, Dr. Richardson helped me untangle the knot of emotions. Grief for James, anger at Katherine, guilt over pressing charges against family, and fear about my future alone. She taught me techniques to manage the anxiety attacks that had started after discovering the theft, and gave me permission to feel the full range of my emotions without judgment. Healing isn't linear, she reminded me often. Some days will be better than others. That's normal. One unexpected source of support came from Frank Martinez, the pawnshop owner who had recognized James's watch and contacted me. What began as gratitude for his integrity evolved into a genuine friendship. Frank and his adult children invited me to Sunday dinners, included me in holiday celebrations, and offered practical help with household repairs James would have handled. "Your family now," Frank declared one evening, in a tone that brooked no argument. "James would want someone looking out for you." There was no romantic undertone to Frank's concern. At 65, he still wore his wedding ring 5 years after his wife's death and spoke of her daily. Rather, he had simply recognized a kindred spirit navigating grief and extended the same compassion he wished others had shown him. People get uncomfortable around grief, he observed as we shared coffee one afternoon. They want you to hurry up and get back to normal so they don't have to face their own mortality. But there's no timeline for healing. Frank's wisdom, earned through his own losses, helped me navigate the awkward social situations that arose after Katherine and Philip's court case. Former friends who chose sides. Acquaintances who asked intrusive questions. Well-meaning people who offered platitudes rather than practical support. 6 months after the court hearing, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and right. I used a portion of James's life insurance money to establish a scholarship at the local community college for students pursuing degrees in architectural design. James had often mentored young architects, and this seemed a fitting tribute to his generous spirit. At the small ceremony announcing the James Crawford Memorial Scholarship, I spoke briefly about James's belief in education and his desire to help others achieve their dreams. Harold attended, frail but determined to honor his son's memory. Katherine and Phillip did not come, though Lucas was there, solemn in a suit that reminded me painfully of James at the same age. After the ceremony, Lucas approached me hesitantly. "I'm sorry about what Mom and Dad did, Aunt Melissa." "None of that was your fault, Lucas," I assured him, my heart breaking for this child caught in the middle of adult failures. "You know your Uncle James thought the world of you." "I'd like to be an architect too," he confided. "Like Uncle James." I hugged him close, feeling James's presence more strongly than I had in months. He would have loved that. My return to teaching full-time had been a crucial step in my healing. My third graders, with their unfiltered enthusiasm and resilience, reminded me daily that life continued. Their innocent questions about Mr. Crawford in the class photos required honest but age-appropriate answers. "My husband died, but I keep his picture here because love doesn't end when someone dies." Their acceptance of this simple truth was often more comforting than adults' complicated condolences. Katherine and Philip's marriage had not survived the scandal and financial fallout. Philip moved to Denver for a fresh start, while Katherine remained in Houston, humbled by the consequences of her actions. She had begun making cautious attempts at reconciliation, sending cards on holidays and my birthday. I hadn't responded yet, unsure whether rebuilding any kind of relationship was possible or healthy. "Forgiveness doesn't mean restoring trust," Dr. Richardson advised when I brought Katherine's latest overture to our session. "You can forgive someone, meaning you release the active anger and wish them well, without allowing them back into your inner circle." This distinction helped me navigate the complex emotions surrounding Katherine. I didn't wish her ill, but I wasn't ready to risk being hurt by her again either. Setting this boundary felt like progress rather than bitterness. On the anniversary of James's death, I took the day off work and visited his grave with fresh flowers. The polished granite headstone was simple, as he would have wanted. I sat beside it for a long time, talking to him as I had throughout our marriage. "I miss you every day," I told him, running my fingers over his name etched in stone. "But I'm doing okay. I think you'd be proud of me." A gentle breeze rustled the nearby trees, and I allowed myself to imagine it was James's response. Later that evening, I sat in my living room, looking at his watch in its display case. The same watch that had nearly torn his family apart had now become a symbol of healing for me. Not because of its monetary value, but because recovering it had forced me to stand up for myself in ways I never had before. I thought about the journey of the past year, the devastating loss, the shocking betrayal, the unexpected friendship, the slow healing. I thought about Katherine and what had driven her to such a desperate act. I thought about Harold and Evelyn, facing their daughter's true nature so late in life. I thought about Philip, whose greed had cost him his marriage and reputation. And I thought about Frank Martinez, whose simple act of integrity had changed the course of so many lives. The watch that had measured time in James's life now measured my healing. Its steady tick-tick-tick reminded me that time continued to move forward, carrying me with it whether I was ready or not. James had lived by a code of honesty and integrity that some in his family had never understood or valued. By standing up against their betrayal, I had honored his memory more truly than any material possession could represent. As I ready myself for the second year without James, I'm learning that grief changes rather than disappears. It becomes less sharp, more integrated into the fabric of daily life. The waves still come, but I'm no longer in danger of drowning. I built a life raft of memories, friendships, meaningful work, and hard-won wisdom. The most unexpected lesson from this painful chapter has been learning to recognize the wolves in sheep's clothing, even when they come in the guise of family. Not everyone who claims to care for you has your best interests at heart. True character reveals itself not in easy times but in moments of opportunity and temptation. James knew this, I think. He saw his sister clearly but loved her anyway. He recognized her flaws without letting them diminish his own integrity. If I can learn to do the same, to see people clearly without becoming bitter or cynical, then perhaps that's the most valuable inheritance he left me, worth far more than any watch, no matter how precious. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you rebuild your life afterward? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in our struggles is the most healing gift of all. And if my story touched you in any way, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life journeys through loss and recovery. Thank you for walking this path with me today. Your support means more than you know.